Hello and welcome everybody to our webinar partnered by Guidant Global. My name is Caroline Dillon. I manage content for Procurement Leaders, and today I am absolutely delighted to be joined by an amazing panel. We have Pam Beard, SVP Global Technology, Automation and Data for Guidant Global. We have Michael Toussaint, SVP and Director at US Bank Corporate Procurement, and Marie-France, VP Client Services at Wrapup and Guidant Global. So today, what are we going to talk about? We are going to delve a little bit deeper into the topic of agility and how to drive change in your contingent workforce management. We're going to be covering topics, as you can see on your screen right now, such as process redesign being a crucial factor in the search for agility, the innovative tech solutions that are driving this digital and process transformation, and how greater agility translates into more effective workforce strategies to directly support organizational and strategic goals. We are going to be obviously looking at collaboration. We are going to be looking at contingent labor, tech. Basically, we are going to try and give you an overview so that you can optimize your agility strategy. Before we start, I would like to draw everybody's attention to the icons that you have at the bottom of your screen. So the two main ones that I want you to be aware of are the help one, which is for any tech difficulties. Please click this if there's any tech difficulties. We will do our best to help you out. And then the Q&A button. So please don't wait until the end of the session to put your questions through to our panel today. We want to hear from you. We want this session to be as interactive as possible. So even if you have a question now, put it in and we'll get to it, okay? So because I think we are good to go. So with this in mind, I would like to first take it to our speakers who are going to offer us a short positioning piece to help bring you a little bit of context and, set the scene, so to speak. So Marie, when you're ready, on to you.
Sure, thank you. And good morning and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Marie-France. I work as the VP of Client Services for Wrapup, which essentially means that I oversee the MSP operations for any customer that rolls up into the Wrapup brand. And I'm also accountable for driving best practices within the Wrapup and Guidant Global organizations. And I'm very excited to be participating in this panel conversation today because I think that it's a really important conversation to have around agility. And so before we kind of dive into the meat of the conversation, I think it's important that we first take a step back and really think about the definition of agility. So if you look at the Oxford Dictionary, they essentially say agility really relates to the ability to move quickly and easily. So if you apply that to the world of contingent labor, we need to ensure that our framework is designed in a way where you can constantly reassess and you can adapt as things change within the environment, within your geographic region, et cetera. And I think that I speak for everybody in the industry in that, when you look back over the past year, you look at the pandemic, and you also think about talent shortages that are occurring right now. This is testing agility in the contingent labor space like never before. And I think that you'll find through this conversation, we're going to have like an organic conversation where we dive into how technology plays a role. We're going to talk about some best practices that you should infuse within your contingent programs to make sure that it's set up for agility. But on a personal note, and what I've kind of learned through this whole experience is that we need to constantly stress test our contingent programs. We need to ensure that we're scalable and we're also able to attract and acquire talent that is new and innovative in nature. Through the pandemic, we learned that there's a need to locate niche skills related to contract tracers, temperature screeners, etc. And these were types of roles that typically were not contained within a contingent program. And so we had to come up with creative solutions in order to quickly identify so that the demands of the business could be met and so that operations could continue. Also, through the pandemic, for certain industries like the financial services, there were growths that took place. And so, we had to come up with quick solutions in order to acquire temporary workers associated with mortgages, acquire underwriters and things of that nature. And so, there was really a need to partner with the suppliers and really develop the right supply chain to handle quick demands and really position every organization to meet their goals and objectives. I think also over the past year and a half, we've sort of tested that whole concept around what is the magic number of suppliers. I think that everyone had an idea around how many vendors would be needed in order to drive volume and to keep your suppliers attentive. But now that we have the talent shortage in place, is it suitable to have all of your eggs in one basket or a few baskets? Or do you need to shift it in a minute's notice in order to come up with a solution to acquire talent? And I think that for a lot of organizations as well, we had to entertain and question what is that delicate balance between risk and business objectives. And so, I think in the past, one of the biggest drivers around a contingent program and having an MSP and VMS solution was to mitigate risk within the organization. But the shift from due to the pandemic and due to talent shortages, we've really had to reassess how do we have conversations around risk and business needs in order to remain agile and to ensure that we're getting the talent in the door. Michael, what are your thoughts from an introductory perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Marie. Welcome, everybody, and very excited to be a part of this panel today. As stated earlier, my name is Michael Toussaint, and I have responsibilities for the strategic sourcing team and the category strategies within U.S. Bank's procurement department. I've been in a procurement role, several roles over the last 18 years, and I have to say that the last year and a half has been the most chaotic and with the greatest level of uncertainty that I've encountered in my entire career. Uncertainty kind of seems to be the new normal. New things pop up every single day, many of them that we haven't even thought of in the past that now we have to quickly address and resolve. The pandemic has really caused the procurement environment to change at an accelerated rate. And we've been forced to really relook at all of our procurement strategies and increase our operational agility to meet the needs of our internal business lines. Risk has changed as well. We have to quickly identify new risks that come up. And things like labor shortages or supply chain interruptions and things like that have caused us to really focus on what are the new risks that we need to be aware of in our environment. And so improving our agility with both technology and process improvements is really a must for us to be successful in this new environment. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Pam.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, Pam Beard, SVP for Global Technology, Data, and Automation. And as Michael said, and Marie mentioned as well, the last 18 months has really challenged all of us from an agility perspective. Some of the things that we had taken for granted for a number of years suddenly didn't really work from a process business perspective. And from where I'm sitting within an organization, a fascinating time. We had to be able to move very quickly to investigate new options that could support some of the challenges that Michael mentioned, where resourcing perhaps would have been traditionally you're looking for workers in your general location, perhaps within driving distance to an office. Suddenly, there may not have been enough workers in those locations. How do we look in different locations? How do we interview and screen those candidates to ensure that they're qualified, but then how do we onboard them? Even the onboarding process of workers changed because you didn't have that in-person touch, meeting someone, greeting someone, bringing them into the office. Suddenly, you've got a new employee that's starting, contingent or otherwise, working from their home. So how do you bring them into the organization? How do you do that in a cost-effective manner? So it's been really a fascinating few months, year and a half now, I suppose. We've moved beyond months at this point, and how we became more agile in supporting some of that procurement activity and re-looked at how we're sourcing things and how can technology support that. And as we talk a little bit further, one of the things that we have learned from this is really that technology and business need to work hand in hand and be focused on the same strategic objectives, because we don't have the luxury of months of planning and timing. We need to be able to move on a dime and adopt new processes, but with that comes some challenges from an organization where everyone is experiencing change on a near constant basis. I'm really looking forward to our conversation and any of the questions that you might have as we talk about this very important topic that seems to be continuing at warp speed. Caroline?
Brilliant. Thank you so much to you all, and thank you for giving that overview. So, you have, all three of you touched upon it. These last 18 years have been incredibly challenging, and procurement has had to completely shift, essentially, to adapt to the new norm. And, I mentioned in my introduction, obviously, we are going to be covering agility. We've said this. We are going to be covering contingent workforce. But Marie, you use that word partnership. I'm using collaboration, partnership, but ultimately it does come down to that. And this is something that is becoming very, very crucial nowadays, especially with, this new world order. And, I wanted to take us a little bit more specifically to the move to remote working. The move to remote working has obviously had a huge factor, for procurement change and approach, to contingent working. The need for collaboration with risk teams and HR and et cetera. This has become paramount. So, Michael, I would like to start with you. If you could maybe take us through what organizations have had to do to become more agile and competitive. How did they change their business? What specific examples, come to mind for you?
Sure. And, with most organizations, we became a mostly remote workforce overnight. One day I was in the office, the next day I was not. We still had, a lot of our employees in the branches. We had to make sure that we met our customers' needs. In a pandemic, money is something that people feel comfortable having at home. And so we needed to keep our branches open, and we needed to keep our employees safe and our customers safe. So part of the branch experience was almost a remote worker within a branch, trying to keep that distance, between our branch employees and the customer base. We had to tackle issues like, how do we get goods and services to people, with people moving home? How do we execute our contracts? Most of our contracts were executed with wet signatures, and we had to move to DocuSign as a way to execute our contracts. And so there was also, as I mentioned earlier, new risks that popped up that we had to address and mitigate immediately to work in this new environment. And as Pam said, we had to really, develop a work from home capabilities for our employees and our contractors. Typically, our contractors worked in our sites. We did not have a lot of contractors working from home. That was kind of one of our policies, but that changed overnight. And so we had to change our whole workforce management in a very, very short period of time. In the early days, COVID-19 protocols and contact tracing was extremely important. For those people that were coming and going to the sites, we had to know where they were. If they were contingent, we had to know who they worked for. We had to know how do we communicate with them on a day-to-day basis. We typically didn't have their personal email addresses, so we could not contact them directly. We had to go through their organization. And so it created a whole new way of doing business, within our organization. And we still had to be very conscious of not encroaching on co-employment issues or confidentiality issues. We couldn't, shout from the highest mountain tops that so-and-so had COVID. We had to do it right. And so we had to work very, very closely with our HR department. We had to come up with new policies and really, do everything as quickly as possible using the technologies that were at hand. At this time, we were also implementing our new VMS system. And so that created a level of complexity as well. The risks that, we were addressing at the time, part of it was, getting people to work remotely and getting our contingent workforce to work remotely. And so we had to introduce new technology to enhance monitoring because our contingent workforce was no longer working on our sites or working in clean rooms at vendor facilities and things like that. And they were working from their homes. So we had to develop new technologies to ensure that, all of our data was remaining safe in that. And then we continue to run into labor shortages. With our contingent workforce, we no longer just compete with like organizations, we're competing with the entire market for resources now. And from a procurement perspective, cost is one of the factors that we need to address, but our costs are going to increase because our labor is scarce. One of the things we've done to combat that is, using a remote workforce, we can now look across different markets and different geographies for resources. I don't need them all here in Minneapolis. I can pull resources from the entire United States because they're working remote, and it doesn't matter, any longer. And so when we were looking at all of this, and we had to become as agile as possible, changes had to be made on a daily basis, and decisions had to be made. And so we utilized our MSP, Barpellum. Marie is a big part of that, and our VMS to help us make changes as quickly as possible, and really change the program at US Bank.
Yeah, thank you so much for that recap, Michael. And you mentioned resources, and I do want to take us back to that a little bit later down the line. But you also talked a lot about, the technology side, and I was wondering, Pam, on what was your experience on Guidant Global, Michael mentioned a lot of changes that were done with technology. So you, obviously, in your unique position, I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Sure. So one of the things that Michael talked about was labor shortages. And with the pandemic changing how procurement perhaps look at finding those workers. In a traditional model, pre-pandemic, a lot of that was through the VMS with local-based suppliers who in turn had a fabulous performance track record of supplying labor into specific locations. With the pandemic, it opened up opportunities to really look at cost of labor, where did the labor reside? So from a technology perspective, we were able to leverage a few different things. One were some direct sourcing platforms where we were able to expand the reach and able to tap into some other suppliers that perhaps we hadn't been able to in the past, but where we knew from our experience with other clients that they had good performance with the type of labor categories that US Bank was looking for. So we were able to look at our supply base. We were able to look at direct sourcing. We're also able to use a number of different technologies to evaluate the cost of that labor and where might be the most cost-efficient location to procure some of that labor. And that could have just been due to a turn down in a particular labor market that US Bank wasn't in, but did have available labor. It could be that some people had moved into a full remote working situation and they were in locations where they hadn't been before. And so how do we tap into those people and find those people? And oftentimes we found that the cost for those workers had changed as well. So we were able to tackle it both from a procurement sourcing perspective as well as from a cost perspective. Michael also mentioned DocuSign and some of the impacts that it had in the branches and needing to move to more of a wet signature. We also saw that with a number of our clients where perhaps we had contracts that needed to get done. And so likewise, we also, in some cases, incorporated DocuSign into the workflows within our VMS, something that had been talked about quite a bit pre-pandemic, but clients hadn't necessarily moved that direction. And the pandemic provided that spark to say, hey, wait, maybe there is a better way. Maybe this is something that we need to take a look at. And that's certainly one of the things that we saw quite frequently was that the urgency to change accelerated with the pandemic. As Michael said, went from one day in the office to the next day working from home. And suddenly, okay, how are we going to do this? Or how are we going to do this? And some of those things that have maybe been in conversation for 6-9 months took on a different level of urgency. And it wasn't just about the technology, though, but it was bringing the business along, looking at how we helped support the change management with the business to introduce that technology, because people were going through quite a bit of change, not just from a work perspective, but from their personal life perspective. And change management went along very much with that agility and how we introduce those changes to not only our clients, but to the workforce, to the suppliers, and to our own employees as well. So it became really a partnership with our clients and with the business to support that change. We also saw with our VMS partners, one of the first things that happened was an evaluation of, were we capturing all of the information that we needed to capture now? As Michael mentioned, suddenly we cared about some things that probably no one had really thought about before. Obviously, as Michael said before, you couldn't shout from the mountaintops that someone had COVID, but it was really important that we were able to track that information. How did we track that information? How did we store that information? Did we have a place to store that information securely so that we could work with our suppliers? How did we provide that information back to our clients so that they had the information? They knew who would be showing up to work, who might not be showing up to work because they were sick. Was it something that we were going to need to look to backfill that position? How do we go about backfilling that position? So it also became really a matter of, how did we morph and change adding new custom fields, for example, into our VMS to track that information. How do we encrypt those fields? And how do we provide that information back? So there was a lot of different things that we had to tackle all at once. We've certainly nailed some of it as we've moved forward through the pandemic, and now still looking for greater opportunities to really improve the way that we work and some of our process flows as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much both for that detail. And you've actually touched upon some really good elements. You know, where do we find this labor? You know, like and how do we go about the sourcing? And that kind of takes me to my next section of you know, the talent sourcing. This is something that I would like to delve a little bit into further, Marie, with you. You know, obviously we've mentioned costs a lot, you know, and there's been a lot of staffing revenue cuts. So, you know, businesses have really had to shift their approach to talent sourcing and you know, move away from the traditional best practices, so to speak, to become more competitive and attractive. So what priorities essentially should they be considering, and what are the new best approach and practices to tackle these new challenges? What are your thoughts, Marie?
Sure. And, you know, I think that I'll first start it off by saying, you know, we need to recognize that in-person is not going to return in 2021. I think that there was a study that came out yesterday that basically said, you know, due to the Delta variant, the labor market is decelerating. And so, one, I think organizations need to throw out the window that the concept of in-person services is going to occur in 2021 is very unlikely to happen. And we need to be fully aware of the fact that there is a labor shortage out there. I think Bloomberg yesterday as well indicated that there's approximately 9 million openings, but on average, we're only filling 6 million of positions. And so, you know, that definitely creates an environment where candidates have a say in where they go to work. Like Michael mentioned earlier, you know, organizations aren't competing with like industries anymore. You know, when you look at U.S. Bank and some of their data entry type of works or tellers, you know, they're competing with folks that might have be interested in taking a job at Amazon or at Home Depot just because of the wage market and the high level of competition. And so what does this mean for organizations right now? You know, I think we can look at it through a multitude of ways. One, there needs to be agility. You need to constantly challenge the status quo around how do you acquire talent. Pam mentioned talent pools previously when she was talking about technology, but that's something that everyone needs to explore right now. If you know that work is going to remain remote and you have skills that are repeatable and are in high volume within your organization, this is the ideal time to take advantage of that remote trend and build a talent pool that you know, really involves partnership with your HR groups to maybe identify silver medalists, to take advantage of your brand and, you know, build a pool of resources that can be available for contingent temporary usage. And you can acquire that talent at lower cost because you're not dealing with typical staffing markups. You know, you can essentially take those workers and route them through a payroll provider. So if I am a procurement person listening in on this conversation and I have an MSP provider, I would immediately start the conversations around direct sourcing. I would get a handle on whether or not they as an organization have capabilities around curation and whether or not they can help with the sourcing effort. But I would also be challenging them around, you know, how do we address light industrial and manufacturing needs right now? Should we abandon master vendor concepts? Because unfortunately, it's not an environment right now. It's not sustainable where you can have one vendor finding the talent. You need to have that local presence, but you need to complement it right now, because for every staffing organization, it's very difficult. It's more expensive to find the talent because recruiting is harder than ever. Also, I think, when I look at what do organizations need to do, I take a step back and I think about when the pandemic hit and when the talent shortages surfaced as a result. We immediately on the Barpellum senior leadership side started having conversations with our customers as well as our supply chain to understand how do we ensure that our customers remain a client of choice. And we had to have some frank conversations with suppliers, and I'm very happy that they were honest around, what does it take to attract talent right now. And like Michael mentioned, although cost containment is important, you can't shy away from the fact right now that individuals are requesting and requiring higher wages right now. It's not an environment where a company's brand alone is going to get people in the door. At a cost level, you need to be competitive. One of the things that a supplier mentioned to me is that candidates don't want to do the math right now. So for example, I see a lot of companies trying to include bonuses, retention bonus, 6 months, 9 months down the road. The reality is that the talent pool wants relief right now. And so you're not going to get the desired results if your initial bill rate is not competitive in nature. You need to start from a position of competition, and you add on those things related to bonuses, sign-on bonuses, things that normally we would have said was taboo in the past and you don't incorporate in your contingent program. The reality is that you have to embed them in the program right now in order to find and retain the talent. Also, a huge change, and this is something that I encourage everyone to do, is to explore your onboarding process, especially for light industrial, manufacturing, admin clerical type of roles. I think we all need to remember and really think about what you see during the weekend when you do your errands. People today can go into a Home Depot, their local grocery store, and get a position with competitive wages the same day. And so, we really have to have frank conversations around how do we improve and decrease the onboarding process. Some of the feedback from our supplier community is that you really want to push to keep it around 2 to 3 days in length so that you don't lose out and have a higher frequency of people falling off from the time that they accept an offer. And so organizations need to think about, if they have drug testing as a requirement, can you migrate away from traditional lab panel drug tests and move to a swab test or e-cups in order to get the results faster? Or are there certain portions of the background check that can be abandoned for certain skill sets? Do you really need to have education verification, employment verification at a job title level? Really determine what are your adjudication rules around criminal checks. Is there an opportunity to reduce some of the requirements based off of the type of role and the level of access that that individual has to confidential information? And then lastly, I think everyone needs to think about some of the environmental factors that exist within their organization. And that kind of goes back to the fact that candidates have a lot of choice right now. And so, although you're dealing with temporary workers, you need to realize that individuals really right now want to have flexibility. And so in the past, I've encountered clients that want to have strict attendance guidelines. Is that really fair in this marketplace right now where people are being challenged with childcare constraints, or they might have to deal with unexpected illnesses within their family? Maybe we need to pull back a little bit on some of the rules and regulations that we previously have had with the temporary population, and really focus on the fact that people is really, one of our number one assets that we have as an organization. And so, we need to create a more harmonious environment in order to retain the talent right now. And then lastly, I'll say, when you think about the vendor side, what can we do to partner again with the suppliers? They are an extremely important piece of the puzzle right now. And we need to ensure that we're creating an environment in which they really want to participate. The reality is that suppliers right now are ranking clients, and they're assessing the probability that they could make a placement within that organization. Again, and that goes back to the fact that the cost of business, conducting that type of business, is increasing on their side. And so as a procurement leader, you need to really assess whether or not you're an employer or client of choice. Are you making it easy for your suppliers right now to obtain business? Are you operating with competitive rates so that they can yield a profit on their side? And are you fostering more dialogue, with the hiring managers right now so that they feel like they're connected to the organization so that they can adequately sell the positions to the candidate pool? So those are some of the things that, immediately pop up in my mind when I think about that topic. Pam or Michael, are there other things that you'd like to add on in respect to talent and what we need to do in order to be agile right now?
Yeah, so I'll elaborate on a couple of things that you said. With technology, our VMS, the metrics are becoming very, very important. In the past, I would probably look at them on a monthly basis to see how we were doing and see how the program was running and things like that. That has changed to more of a daily interaction. Is the time to fill increasing? Are my costs increasing? And, it is something that we need to be very cognizant of, as we look at maintaining our contingent workforce. As you said, it's a balancing act. I need to control costs, but I also need resources. And as those resources become more scarce, what can I do to achieve that? And, I talked a little bit about looking at geography holistically. That's one thing we can do. We can look at, different resources. We have a lot of our resources as a level 1, 2, 3, 4. Do I change that mix a little bit? Do I, change the mix of onshore, offshore? And so, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, is we have to be extremely agile, and we have to change our strategies consistently and constantly, across our organization. And so it has become a day-to-day balancing act to ensure that we get the resources that we need.
Thank you so much, Maria and Michael, and apologies for the slight tech glitch there. There we go. We're talking about tech and the importance of tech whilst working remotely. So that one is on me. Maria, you mentioned there the aspect of regulations, and I would like to take us to that because I think that's a very important point. There are new regulations to consider, and when we were having our chats, about this session and what we wanted to broach, Pam, you made the comment that taxes and regulations and, the way the function has to view this and has to approach this, it really is paramount and must be considered and has very much changed. So Pam, I was wondering if maybe you could take us through your thoughts here.
Sure. So as we've been talking about direct sourcing and where do you procure your labor from, and is there a different way to procure labor and a less expensive way? One of the things that we quickly realized is that our traditional technology and setup for that wasn't quite sufficient. When you think about remote working, the United States is a hodgepodge of taxes and regulations, whether by state or even within a state, perhaps by county or major metropolitan area. And laws have been written with the traditional paradigm in mind. When you think about some of the taxes and how labor might be taxed, it's been focused on where is the client located, where is the office located. And the pandemic quickly turned that on its head. And I think, as we all know, sometimes government regulations don't change all that quickly when you're going through the bureaucracy. And so we had to sit back and really think about, so this is our technology that we have in place. What are some of the impacts of that? And taxes quickly became one of those things that we had to focus on. Where is the labor actually being performed? Working with legal actually, and looking at how were the regulations written for different locations? And then how did we migrate some of our technology solutions to support the fact that work might now be performed in California, where perhaps it was performed in Minnesota. Certainly everyone knows that there are different labor regulations for a worker that's based in California versus one that's going to be based in Minnesota. So how did we adapt with our technology, where the presumption for years has been the work was tied to a client location. Primarily, of course, some movement had started towards freelance workers and things like that, but primarily contingent workforce was co-located with a client in a particular location. So we had to adapt and change some of those configurations and best practice recommendations to our clients to ensure that as we were reacting to the business environment and to that everyone moving home, that we supported our clients and ensured that they stayed in compliance with some of those regulation changes. And as we were talking about direct sourcing, how do we take that into consideration for the regulations that we're now looking at for a workforce that was spread all across the country, and in some cases across the world. It wasn't just a US focused thing. Obviously, pandemic is worldwide, but now we were looking sometimes at workers that weren't based in the US. And we had to tackle questions like, was that okay? How would we ensure that those workers got paid if they were in a foreign country? And coming up with technology solutions to support all of that. So it certainly was something that was not really contemplated pre-pandemic, but again, like I said before, we had to be very agile in how we responded to all of those things and stay in close contact with the business as things were changing on a nearly daily basis.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Pam. And sorry, I'm just conscious of time, and I realize that, there is still a huge chunk, which is technology. And we've actually had, a question which is always the classic question, from the audience, which is essentially, will procurement jobs be replaced completely with AI? And that kind of leads us nicely to essentially our next section, looking at, the role of tech with all of this. I think personally, I believe tech being an enabler, and I know, Pam, this is something that we've discussed, but what first of all, Pam, quickly, obviously, due to time, but what are your thoughts on the whole concept of that dynamic, that balance between tech and, the procurement function, and where does tech stand in all of this? What's the balancing act that we need to try and find here?
So one of the things that we certainly have noticed is that tech doesn't replace everything. So the question about, does AI replace procurement? For us, the answer is no. It supports it. It changes it. We've certainly looked at and have brought on an automation platform that we have been leveraging to improve the delivery to our clients in a number of areas so that we're able to allow our workforce to focus on the higher value strategic actions versus on some of those more repetitive rote activities that sometimes creep into any person's job from a day-to-day basis. So it's not about replacing the person, but it's about redefining their position in such a way that they're able to be more strategically focused on serving their clients, whether it's a procurement organization, and that means internally, working with their suppliers externally, and also for Guidant and how we're supporting our clients like US Bank to be more efficient. Are there things that, one of the things that we found, we had a solution that we devised with one of our clients where they needed to procure a lot of workers in a very short amount of time. And for not a terribly a lot of money, is typical within procurement, looking for the best price. And we were able to actually craft a solution with an automation platform where we were able to automate a lot of the initial steps in contacting and reaching out to candidates. We were able to leverage it from a direct sourcing perspective. Oftentimes a client's brand has more cash in the market and much more recognizable to the workforce. So seeing the name like a US Bank or another client name out there, certainly people recognize that name, they know that name, and they look at that name a little bit more, and they're more interested in the position perhaps than if they're approached by a traditional contingent workforce supplier. So we were able to leverage the brand. We were able to quickly do that funnel of candidates, focusing in on some very objective criteria for the clients using automation for those objective things. Then when you took that next step and you really, we're of course talking about people here. People are not terribly fond of a purely automated process. I think if all of us know, if we call a customer service line and all we can get is press 1, press 9, press 8, we get pretty frustrated pretty fast. Maybe for the initial screening, that works fine, but we want to get to that person. And so that's one of those things that we focused on when we were using automations. How do we quickly funnel down to that pool of really qualified candidates so that we can hand them over seamlessly to our in-person, highly trained, highly qualified workforce to continue the screening process and to work with the client. So rather than spending an awful lot of money and resources on that upfront screening process, we were able to funnel it down using technology and automation to a pool where we could then engage with those candidates and then present back to the clients a very well-qualified, much smaller pool and a much smaller time frame to meet their hiring requirements, where they needed to turn around an enormous number of workers in a very short period of time. And that's just one of those ways that we were able to enable technology to do something that would have taken a lot of resources, i.e. money, to get to that place, and a lot more time than what we had when we had to respond to the changing market.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Pam. And I was wondering, Marie, Michael, with your experience, based on what Pam has just said, what are your thoughts? Would you care to comment? Marie, let's go to you first, and then Michael.
Yeah, so I think Pam was very much spot on with respect to automation, but I think that technology even plays a significant role in what we have to do in order to be agile on a day-to-day basis. I talked a little bit about the need for competition and to ensure that we have competitive rate structures within our program. Technology plays a significant role in ensuring that we have access to data so that we, at a moment's notice, have insights into, what is the market rate for a skill set. And so, I encourage everyone on the procurement side to work with their MSP providers to make sure that they're readily providing third-party insights so that they understand, what is the going rate at a skill set level, because these things right now are changing day by day. And as an organization, everyone needs to be flexible and understand what does it mean to be competitive right now in order to secure the labor. So, for me personally, technology is a critical aspect. Also, I think that, and this is probably a call out there to some of the VMS providers, we need to constantly think about, what is the right supplier approach in devising our cost strategy within our programs. Should it be rate card driven? Should it be markup driven? And I think, especially over the past few months, more and more corporations are asking the question and potentially wanting to make a shift. How quickly can the VMS handle a change in process? Those are things that organizations are going to want to know, because I think that, when I look back at the past 18 months, there used to be a tagline in the United States for educational programs, and it said, the more you know. I think right now the reality is the more you know, the less you know, meaning that we are constantly evolving our thoughts around how do we acquire labor, and we're constantly challenging ourselves. And so when things change based off of demands in volume, or things change because of shortage of talent, we need the technology to be just as flexible to adapt to the changing way in which we want to work with our suppliers to acquire that talent.
Brilliant. Thank you, Marie. Michael, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I love the question, will AI replace procurement? I think technology certainly has a place in the procurement process, and I think it's becoming much, much more important. Technology can enhance our ability to acquire goods and services quickly, but there is a component that I don't think it will change. And especially, a bank, we buy mostly services. We're not buying widgets, we're not buying raw materials and things like that. So a lot of what we buy are services. And I think one of the most important things, when you buy services, is that partnership that you establish with your vendor base. And so I think AI will continue to assist procurement in the acquisitions of goods and services, and it may even change the procurement role. So it will be more of a vendor partnership, than it was in the past. And so I can see that it will change the function of procurement a bit and change our roles within procurement, but I don't see it replacing it, just for that, that partnership component that needs to exist for a lot of the services that we utilize.
Brilliant, thank you. And I realize we're getting closer to the end, so I would like to take us out. There's a question here, which, we could probably make a webinar about this question, but, having a look to the future, Ferry is asking, what type of resilience you may suggest for the business after or during COVID-19. I would like to take us more towards that future aspect, because we are now at the time of the year where we have to be thinking about 2022, 2023, and let's face it, we're all a little bit tired with COVID, and probably I think I speak for a lot of people in saying that, we want to move beyond this. So to take us home, guys, what would be your thoughts, to this question? What would be your one piece of advice, essentially, to remain resilient and to keep on driving this change and to remain agile? What would be your advice to our audience? And I'll take a little round the room. Does somebody want to go first, or should I pick on someone?
I'm happy to go first. I would say from a technology perspective, to stay agile, realize that technology can be your friend, and continue that working relationship between the business and technology. Technology will always support business strategy, and keeping those lines of communication open as things start to look towards the future can only enhance the business overall.
Brilliant. Thank you. Michael, how about you go next?
Yeah, I think, some of the big changes that we're going to see from a procurement perspective is the way we do RFPs. A lot of times in the past, we would have vendors come in and present. We would have all-day presentations, and we would meet people face-to-face. And for the last year and a half, that has not happened. And we've done more Zoom calls or virtual meetings, and that tends to go a little bit quicker. And so part of it is a need for the process to go quicker because it's an ever-changing environment. But part of it is, I think we've become a little bit more efficient in that RFP process by having a lot of the discussions remote versus face-to-face.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. And Marie, take us home.
Sure, and I think Michael hit it, when he was talking about speed, because I think that ties back in, right, to the whole definition around agility and, being flexible. I think that as we look to the future, we need to ensure that we are consistently evaluating. We are ensuring that we are developing strong partnerships with our suppliers because they are a critical component to acquiring talent. And we need to leverage analytics to be our guide as we, move forward in the journey. So, technology plays a huge role in that. Michael cited that several times. We need to pay attention to time to fill criteria, pay attention to attrition rates within the program, to constantly reassess what's going on, to identify where do we need to change and where do we need to infuse additional creative solutions in order to get the resources in the door. And I really encourage everybody to continue with that challenge, and let's not forget what we've learned through the pandemic as well. Although it's been highly chaotic, we've been able to keep business running. And when we return to normal, whenever that happens, let's not forget the lessons learned and incorporate that into our day-to-day on a future basis to continuously enhance the service offerings that we're providing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Marie, and thank you, Mike, and thank you, Pam, there. So as I said, we are running out of time. I mean, this is something that we could keep on talking about for a while. I think realistically, each section that we've looked at could be its own webinar, but I just wanted to say to our audience, any questions that weren't picked up on, we will be transferring these along, and our speakers will attempt to answer them. Just because we have had a few questions, yes, the recording will be made available to the audience post-event. You will be able to watch this on demand. So if you know of anybody who hasn't been able to attend, let them know that. They will get an inbox, but let them know. And the final thing I wanted to draw our attention, your attention to is also our feedback form. We're always trying to make these better. We're really keen on hearing from you, so please, put in your thoughts there. And finally, I'm going to give a little bit of a cheeky plug to the PL agenda here. So for anybody who does not yet know, we are running our congresses, and we actually have our America's Congress in, just about 2 weeks' time now. So we're all really excited about that. So if you have not yet registered for either of these congresses, get it done. You have the links in the additional resources. Guys, Marie, Michael, Pam, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. An amazing conversation and really, really insightful. And as per usual, thank you so much to our partners at Guidant Global for helping us put this session together. So I hope that everybody has find this as insightful as I have. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And I really look forward to seeing everybody soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.